Turn off the track, and boom, we are live. Tai Nakamura, I actually had it on random Tokyo Digital Crew tracks before the show, so I'm not sure if it actually got yours. I might put yours on later on. That was Racer Boy. That's just an old random fast techno track that I made a wee while ago. Good to see you all. Welcome to Tokyo Tonight 2. I hope you can hear me now. You probably couldn't hear me a few seconds ago when it was coming in, but I figured out what was wrong and I fixed it right, so you can hear me now. Good, yes. The J-Vlog, I feel you, having a math fight just before the show. Well, as a famous English comedian once said, there are three kinds of people in this world, those who can and those who cannot count. So yeah, anyway, welcome to everybody who joined the show and all the people who joined early for the pre-show. Some people said that they liked music before the show, so I came back and I did that again. I actually don't have so many topics tonight, which is good or bad. So I'll tell you what, if you want me to talk about stuff, please, tonight's the night. Put in the comments, put an @mark Hiko Simon with what you want me to talk about. But I've got a few topics, most of the ones which you can see there in the header, and we can go through that. And in any case, it's great to see all of you guys. Quick going through who was there in the comments. So I see that we have the J-Vlog, Mogberry Pie, how's it? Good to see you. We have Bushido Devil Dog, good to see you. Let me turn off the aircon, hopefully I won't freeze. It's been cold this week, it's been full on proper winter from this week. Who else we got here? Mogberry Pie, Mary Ligos, good to see you. Evening indeed, good morning to you. Who else we got here? We got Tai Nakamura, good to see you, sir. And yes, I'll see if I can get your track Rakyo. It's Rakyo, right? Not Rakyo. Rakuyo. We'll maybe get that on later on the show. Who else we got? Quinn Rankin, good to see you. Kang and Kodos, good to see you. The Sergeant Bilko, boom, good to see you. Sylvana Thavana, good to see you. Good to see everybody. Say hello if you're lurking or whatever. It's just nice to know that you're out there. It's nice to say hello to you. I'll repeat again, I don't have all that many topics this week. It's been a pretty quiet week, so I can of course talk at length. Hey, Tokyo 503, good to see you again. So remember, I will see you more visibly if you hit at Mark Echo Simon, because it'll like flash orange at me, but otherwise I'm just going to get into it and see what we've got. So yes indeed, you've had a temperature spike this week at the J-Vlog, wherever you are, 14 to 16 degrees. Well, it's pretty good. I assume you're talking in Celsius, in which case it's not so bad. Kang and Kodos already has a subject there. Thoughts on driving or walking your kids to school? You're told that it's not advisable. In Japan, no, parents don't take their kids to school. It's sort of not done. There are monitors there, but no, the idea of taking them up to the gates, I know it's pretty much become normal now, like in Australia and America and places like that, but in Japan, no, it's actually, there's school rules against it. So, you know, and there are designated walking paths with volunteer parents to make sure that it's all safe. But yeah, they want to foster the idea of the kids getting there along themselves. Hey Setsuna, good to see you. Jira, yes indeed, good to see you indeed. Tikyo Sam made it, because you want me to talk about the Japanese justice system and the steps people should take to protect themselves and other people in criminally related stories in Japan, if you can't think of another. By the way, I saw the story on Tikyo Sam's Facebook just this evening, just before the show. I saw the situation with a friend of his who has become in a situation of incarceration. And we've talked a little bit about that in the last few weeks with the Carlos Ghosn story, which is on the list for tonight. But so yes, we can get into that certainly, and more and more other exciting stuff. I'm going to try to save some bandwidth by closing some windows, and boom, let's get into the topics and see what we've got. Good to see. We've got a bit of celebrity audience tonight. It's good to see. So yes indeed. First of all, 5 lies to help you get out of the dreaded end of your office parties. So this is the Bounenkais season. I had like 3 last week. I've got 2 next week. I kind of had a cold, like a throat cold. You get it with the cold and the dryness at times of year. And just when you think you're going to get better, just when you thought you got out, it pulls you back in. Because yeah, these Bounenkais, you drink, you talk, it's freezing cold, and you just get sick. And it is like that. It's a drag for a lot of people. So here are some convenient excuses that you can use to get out of these Bounenkais, out of these end of year drinking parties that are often mandatory among different company and other sort of groups. I read these earlier. These are pretty good excuses. The first one is saying that you've been invited to your friend's after wedding party that day. That's not bad. So you got another party to go to, another wedding party. So yes, I'm a heavy drinker, love the alcohol, got to go to a friend's after party. That kind of makes that's some good sense. Second one says, I use this one a bit. My doc says I can't drink anymore because of my uric acid level, cholesterol, etc. I'll use the excuse, which is true, that I'm taking cough medicine and so on at the moment. So that's not a bad one. Mr. Cordyceps is still having Ebola, although if it's Ebola, they'll probably give you more alcohol, assuming it will kill whatever the bug is doing to you. So 3, my spouses and parents, my parents-in-law, are coming over to my place and spending the night that day. That's a bit weak. I suppose if you're young and married, then perhaps you might worry about that. Can't really imagine in Tokyo people living in places big enough to host parents-in-law, but that's one that's recommended apparently. 4, I have a business dinner with Mr. Tanaka from Company Y tonight. Might work, but the problem is you're gonna have to make sure you've got an alibi to cover that. The other one is that it's my spouse's birthday, and if I don't take them out to celebrate, they'll really get upset, which would work, except that I had 3 Bounenkais last week and have like 2 this coming week. So, you know, unless you have like a lot of spouses, or they have multiple birthdays, maybe it wouldn't work, but still, some helpful tips there on getting out of the old Bounenkais thing. So that's the first one that we've got. You may have noticed, if you have a YouTube channel, particularly probably if you are buying subs and whatnot, that you'll have seen your subscription total plummet over December 13 and 14. It's also a risk for me because frankly a lot of my, obviously my views are a lot less than my subs, which probably indicates that I've got a lot of old subscriptions. So generally my sub count does go down on the cleanups. I haven't really noticed it go down this time, but they've warned everybody that you might see a noticeable drop in your subscriber count. Because they're removing spam channels, which is probably that they've identified. I guess the fact that I'm not so affected by this probably means that they've identified more recent subbing places. Hey Odie Jr., good to see you, good evening, good morning, good afternoon, wherever you are. So yes, you might have noticed that your subs have gone down, and that is because YouTube is purging spam accounts. Interested to see who suffers the most from that. It's a bit like, who farted in the elevator? Seriously, the ones who make the noise about it generally are the guilty parties. So I'll be curious to see who acts the most outraged about this, because we'll say, haha, cheater. But yes, they did give a warning this time, so I suppose they're slowly learning their lessons. This has been another big story this week. The government basically following, maybe you guys have heard all the news about in America, how the US government's basically gone all out, announcing that Huawei and Supermicro motherboards and ZTE and these Chinese telecom companies are basically, the hardware is riddled with spyware, and the US government has prohibited government agencies from using hardware from these companies. And an escalation earlier, was it this week or last week, Canada detained the chief financial officer of Huawei, who was visiting Vancouver, who has an open extradition order to the US for selling Huawei mobile phones to Iran, which is under US sanctions. So Canada is obliged to extradite people breaking, it's Canadian law as well, but certainly US law, US sanctions to deport them. So she's facing extradition hearings to the US to face basically hearings as a representative officer of Huawei for selling to Iran, among all the other things. So Japan, ever the sidekick Robin to America's Donald Trump Batman, pretty much said and a few days ago announced that for security reasons they are going to prohibit the procurement and use of hardware or equipment from Huawei or ZTE, which are two Chinese telco companies. And although they're going to introduce this ban formally, they've already asked informally, they've sent out sort of a directive, all companies drop them right now. Now the thing is that Huawei phones are pretty popular in Japan. They're high spec, they're cheap, they've got huge, they've got like 4 cameras on the camera phone thing. So they're pretty popular as like a cheap high spec smartphone, Android phone. So I guess, but 2 days ago, SoftBank said that they're going to drop all Huawei sales, and they're going to purge themselves of all of their equipment to comply with the request from the government. So people are going a little crazy about this, but there again, if you want a cheap phone, probably something which your friends won't have, maybe now's the best time to rush up to SoftBank and get or rush up to Yodobashi Camera or whatever and get a cheap high spec Huawei phone. I assume they'll be going dirt cheap right now, and they're actually very high spec phones, provided of course you remember to say hello nicely to the Chinese security officer who's supposedly listening on the phone on the other end. I'm not sure if all that's true, but apparently these companies, well, they deny that they have any government involvement in their operation, but I believe the story is that there are owners, and the history of these companies involves funding from the Chinese PLA. So yes, there are people who, different companies, countries, and not just Japan, but also Australia and New Zealand also announced that they are purging themselves of these equipment from these companies this week. So that's been kind of big, and SoftBank has promised that they're going to remove all existing Huawei equipment. So yeah, they're really sort of getting dumped. Well, that's what I mean, the J-Vlog. So although it's $800 probably for the Honor, I think it is their flagship phone, chances are they've got to dump all their stock. They're not going to be able to sell them anymore. In fact, they're going to be stuck with the stock and faced with the alternative of just disposing them or having to ship them back to China. So if you want to get one, I assume there are going to be some fire sales on these phones. And yeah, if you're in the market for a cheap one, what can you do? Mr. Cordy Chep, well, certainly the difference is that, and the other thing, of course, is that just looking at this, well, I've said this before, while China has millions of people detained without charge in concentration camps, they're suddenly calling out the human rights violations of Canada, actually using a totally normal law enforcement process to detain the CFO of Huawei. And not only that, but they've since made 2 Canadians disappear in the last week, who are in China. So yeah, what can you do? The Mate 20, I don't know what the Mate 20 is, but yeah, we've got, I think it's in Japan, they've got some pretty good phones from that. SoftBank could always sell the phones cheap to Iran. Yes, that would work out terribly, but they could do that. And good to see you believe in yourself. Welcome into the comments. So same thing again, basically, to keep Huawei out of power grids and railways. They've identified 14 different genres of critical infrastructure, and they've said don't buy that Chinese spyware stuff. Just kind of paranoia. There's no real hard evidence of it, and it's partly just pretty much following what Japan said, but what can you do? So yes, that is that. I think I mentioned, well actually I mentioned this during the week. I've talked a lot about the in fact, what's it called properly? I don't have the tweet on here anymore, but it's the Japan International, what is it, Training Coordination. Basically the apprenticeship visas that Japan has, and all the problems that we've had on this of people getting paid like way below minimum wage, treated like slaves, running away, dying suspiciously. The MPO, the government doesn't administer this visa program itself. It's set up an independent non-profit organization to run it, partly to distance itself from it and to deny responsibility for it. And on the webpage of the site they posted data that apparently in the couple of years that it's been running, in fact they say now over 8 years, 174 people have died, many of them suspiciously, and this, they listed up some of the cases of suicides, work accidents, and whatnot. And yes, they put this information on the site. Lots of people paid this and said, whoa, this is pretty bad, isn't someone going to investigate this? And the Apprenticeship Visa Administrative Organization promptly resolved the situation by taking the information off its website. A little bit after the trainee had bolted somewhat, and the information was already out there, so now newspapers and blogs are pulling this up and saying, what you talking about with us? And as a result, yeah, this just looks worse and worse and worse. And Japan agreed a pact actually with 8 countries this week to try to foster getting more and more foreign workers in better. But this is a pretty black mark on Japan's record, so hopefully they will they'll address this. Believe in yourself. You have a P20 Pro, so we shall see. Is that the Honor phone? Is that a Huawei phone? Well, you might be able to get a cheap upgrade this week, so that might be good for you. And Sergeant Bilka also pointing out Cisco equipment sold abroad being hijacked in transit a few years ago and was backdoored with firmware. So yes, that's right. Well, everybody's paranoid about Chinese backdoors, of course. American, yeah, they had the PRISM program, that Snowden leaked, that actually had major software companies, including Google, Facebook, and Microsoft, and hardware manufacturers as well, that were all on record as building backdoors and giving access to US intelligence apparatus. So you can say that pretty much the assumptions that the Chinese are doing it are based more on the fact that they're doing it themselves, and they're assuming that the Chinese are doing the same things as them, perhaps, than any direct evidence that the Chinese themselves are doing it. Or if they have that, maybe they'll give away their techniques for the way that they found it. Who knows? But what can you do? It's and take your poison, pretty much. So that is also true, but all the more reason if you don't care about having a, I don't know, Motorola phone, which are crap. Who would want a Motorola phone? But probably, whatever. They might have a US backdoor. I mean, yeah. Like I say, if you don't care, it's probably a good chance to get a cheap phone, but certainly the government's being told to purge itself of all of this equipment. Have you seen this week? An honest trailer. People probably know the series from. Is this from the same outfit that makes CinemaSins? I like to keep up with this on YouTube. So they make these sort of honest trailers about different movies, and this came out this week, and it was about the 1970s Spider-Man series in Japan. Apparently, what happened was, now what was the company? Marvel sold the rights to let Toei Cinema, I believe it was, produce its own version of Spider-Man. However, when Japanese took the material, they didn't really care about the proper Peter Parker backstory and the spider being bite and all that sort of stuff. They pretty much just formed their own. It's kind of a Power Ranger, Ultraman sort of backstory. Spider-Man's from like an alien planet. Where everyone's got like spider blood or something in them, and basically he fights big monsters in rubber suits and so on. It's really, really real. Well, one, of course, the trailer is good, but I had no idea about the series. Apparently he's the emissary from hell. It's got these great subtitles and these introductions, but basically, Spider-Man kills people with machine guns. He is the There's some dodgy stuff in there as well. It's really, really, really good, and I highly recommend watching the honest trailer of Japanese Spider-Man that came out this week. This is kind of an interesting one if you're looking for IT jobs in Japan. That I think I mentioned a few weeks ago that NTT Data was offering jobs worth like $300,000 per annum. Apparently ZozoTown is actually willing to offer up to $1 million a year for top artificial intelligence, deep learning and IT engineers, regardless of age. So in a country where it's almost unheard of to get more than like 50 grand for a starting wage, they were offering qualified IT professionals, hundreds of thousands of dollars, basically to match foreign salaries for equivalent qualification. But frankly, these salaries, this is a country where most executive, like most CEOs, CFOs, and most companies make between 100,000 and 300,000. They're offering starting salaries to kids with, proper IT and AI qualifications, basically equivalent to what they would get, or better than what they would get in Silicon Valley, i.e., starting from 300, 500, 600, and some companies going really crazy with that. So it's good to see, but again, given all the sensitivity about salaries in Japan, I do have an expat. I remember when I was in Deloitte Consulting in my first job in Japan, I was a local hire, so I didn't get any expat benefits or anything like that. But there was another person who was sent over to Japan, and she got like an expat package, and she was as junior as I was, but she got kind of those benefits. And I think if she got housing and kind of an expat bonus package, she told me herself that the head of HR took her aside and said, "You don't deserve your salary," which was probably, at that time, it probably would have been 100 grand. And everyone in HR was put out by the fact that someone was receiving a pay that was inappropriate, that they saw as being too high. And if you think that's kind of a one-off or a superficial thing, this is what the whole Gon thing is. The fact that he was receiving, in a country where it's really rare for CEOs to get, more than $1 million, usually a few $100,000, he was getting like officially like 10 or 15 million, and through deferred payments, which is why he's now in detention, he was planning to receive like 75 or 85 million by different counts. Plus he got 4 houses around the world, Lebanon, Lebanon, Rio de Janeiro and Paris, all paid for by the company. So yeah, people generally are put out by the fact, and all the complaints were, a guy who laid off so many people and reduced wages, and look at how much he was enriching himself. That's not fair. It's a very socialist sort of minded employment system, and perhaps I will take this, or I think there is some more golden news here as well. In fact, maybe I'll jump to that. I don't even have that this week. This is all that I've got. So how about we take Tikyo Sam's request for a quick talk about the criminal justice system in Japan, which I've talked about before, which is that basically never mess with the police in Japan. Don't mess with them. I know, particularly having been to, through law school myself, being out drinking in New Zealand with belligerent, people who know their rights and want to fuck with the police and say, I don't need to. When police ask to see your ID and they're saying, "You have no reason to see my ID. I refuse to show you my ID. I know my rights." As people may be familiar in Japan, police can go up to foreigners and they can ask to check if you've got a foreign passport, and they ask to see proof of your citizenship, whatever. And generally in Japan, if you're cooperative with police, the police are pretty mild. Generally they just give out road directions, they collect lost umbrellas. And they're great. And honestly, I've been stopped on a bicycle before and they've asked for my ID, and you just cooperate and they just let you go. But if you are a dick to the police here, or if you are ever involved in an incident of some sort and you become belligerent to the police, you are screwed. There's actually a video I didn't post this week of a Gaijin guy who seemed to have been drunk. It was a Saturday morning at a, was it Starbucks? It wasn't a Starbucks. Maybe it was a Starbucks in Nakameguro. And there were like 6 police basically doing the old police detention routine where they were, probably would have been tased and shot. He was kicking and punching and lashing back at the police, and 6 of them basically just held him down. And when I say held him down, I mean armbar across the throat. It was a chokehold. But slowly holding him down, pushing him so he couldn't move, letting him scream, doing all sorts of stuff, and dragging him away. Once you end up in detention, and because this guy was drunk, if the police decided to charge him with lashing out at them, which they might not have decided to do since they were in the process of just removing him from the place, where he was just being a bit of a dickhead. But if they decide to charge you, even if you didn't do it, you are screwed like 1,000%. I can tell you a story I know about. I'll tell you the story first, maybe about Sam's case, based on what I just read before the show. Hey, Yasser, good to see you. And with all of this is Sam's version of the story. So obviously we don't have any more information than that. But basically, this guy was not living with, but he had an acquaintance who I believe was Mexican, or was it? Or he was anyway, in any case, an American guy who lived in Japan for a long time had an acquaintance who asked if he could have a parcel sent to this guy's apartment. He said sure. He naively picked up the apartment and handed it over to this guy, which apparently contained musical instrument parts and methamphetamine. The police, however, had intercepted the parcel. They saw who picked it up, and they saw who it was delivered to, and they arrested both the guy who ultimately received the package and the guy who picked up the package. The guy who picked up the package disappeared suddenly, basically. And I heard about this a few weeks ago, that basically he disappeared. And hey, John Anderson, good to see you. This guy disappeared, and no one sort of knew where he went. They'd heard about plainclothes, a group of people suddenly rushing into his apartment and dragging him out, which turned out later they found out those were plainclothes police officers. And he just sort of disappeared. And again, the general system with what happens with police in Japan, and when they arrest people for serious crimes, and if he was being arrested for importing meth, that would be treated as a serious crime. He did disappear. People weren't sure. They had to go and ask the police where he was. Well, the difference between China and Japan is that if you ask the police, do you have this guy in detention? They will say, oh yes, we do have him in detention. Sometimes they'll even tell you why, what happened, or whatever. So you don't completely disappear like the head of Interpol did when they went to China, or other people. You'll get information back about them being detained. And you can arrange for things like consular assistance from the embassy, and for a lawyer who won't be able to assist them during interrogation. You can't say, there's no right to remain silent, and there's no right to talk to a lawyer. You can or talk without your lawyer present. In fact, the interrogations happen without your lawyer present. The interrogations happen where you can have an interpreter who will be the interpreter of the police. You can't bring your own interpreter or a lawyer into the room, but there will be times where they will give access for a lawyer to come and visit you and talk to you and check on you. But basically, when you're detained under the premise of being about to be charged with a crime, they can hold you for 20 days. And if you don't confess during that time, the way the justice system works here is it's 99% conviction rate based on confessions. And if you don't confess, they'll basically just keep extending the detention and keep interrogating you until you confess. As I've said before, most common law countries, if you are held for more than 3 days, any confession that you give is presumed to be coerced. It's presumed that 3 days of detention alone is sufficient to presume psychological coercion in murder cases and whatnot. In Japan, shoplifting, they can hold you for 20, 30 days, 40 days. And what they'll do is they'll do this trick where they'll look for as many different things that they can charge you with as possible. And if you don't confess in the first 20 days, they'll just charge you with one of the other things they can charge you, and they'll extend the detention and refresh it for another 20 days. And that's what's happened with Gon, because he didn't confess. He's already been detained for 40 days so far, and they've just extended again. So he's going to be basically behind bars until after Christmas, at least. And there is a thing as well, that once they decide that you did it, it doesn't really matter whether you did it or not at that point. Once they commit to taking you into detention, it's a pretty awkward position for the police to have to back off when they've decided that they're going to charge you with something. Especially given, and you can tell by the 99-point-something% conviction rate that they don't often back off. And you do get this in Japan. You'll get cases where people are put away, even executed for murders that later on other people confessed to, and it turned out that these cases that were based on false confessions, and yet a lot of people who appeal claiming that they were based on false confessions. So the point is, you don't even want to tempt fate by getting into a situation. If you ever get arrested by the police, my advice is be like the Israelis. The Israeli Mossad has a thing that whenever one of their agents is arrested, they are given permission to basically rat out everybody. The way that the Israelis handle it is that with their spy networks is that if one of their people gets caught or goes missing, they immediately pull out everybody. They assume that the person's going to talk rather than make them subject to being tortured to death. So they try to basically they give permission for people to cooperate and talk. And in Japan, that's what you should do. There are cases, however, where even when they're wrong, I do know a case of the 0.9% where a person sort of got away and went to trial and was not convicted. And this was a case that I know of involving rugby people. No, Mr. Koriche, not a cyanide pill. This was a case a couple of years ago where one of the rugby clubs in Tokyo, not one that I played for, was at a Bounenkais. They didn't use one of the 5 excuses that I just used, and apparently they thought one of the guys in the team, bunch of guys, big group of guys, went into karaoke, bought a bunch of drinks, sung a bunch of songs. One of the big guys there passed out drunk, and everybody thought it would be really funny to leave him there stuck with the bill, and they all sort of stuck out. So when the staff came up to find this one drunk guy all by himself and everyone else jumped out, they immediately woke him up and they said, "You have to pay the bill." And the startled drunk guy said, "I'm not paying," and on top of not paying, started beating up the staff. And this was a big guy. Apparently one of the people who had left this guy on his own thought bit of the situation and went back to sort of go and check on him and help sort everything out. But apparently at this time when he came back, the guy was already fighting with the manager and with other staff there. The friend came in basically to hold down his friend and to break up the fight. However, when the police came along, they arrested both of them, and they including the friend who had come back, sort of accusing him of also being a participant. And not only was it assault, but because he didn't pay the karaoke bill and he was trying to get away from that, they charged it basically with aggravated robbery, like bank robbery. So they treated it as an aggravated assault, an assault accompanied by a serious crime of robbery. And these two guys, both of them, so one of them was definitely in the wrong. He started the fight with the staff. But the guy who came back had really come back to help out, to pay and to break up the fight. However, he was detained. He disappeared for a while first, and then he was detained for a couple of months, and then he ended up in jail for more than a year before it went to trial. And when it finally went to trial, he became one of the 0.1% or whatever it is that he was found innocent. But there was a huge movement within the rugby clubs in Tokyo to get him a good defense lawyer and to get him out of that situation. And basically, at trial, it almost never happens. I don't think he confessed either, but even though he was innocent, and even though this was a situation where he clearly had gone back with the intention of paying, and he didn't assault anybody involved, although he did have to pay some compensation money to the people involved. Even with all of that, he lost like a year and a half of his life in a Japanese jail. So the point being, I don't know if he could have avoided that situation when he went back, but obviously you don't mess with the police here. You don't make your own bad situation worse. If you or anyone that gets into trouble like that, contact your embassy first. See what sort of consular assistance they can get. At least knowing that the embassy is involved generally means you'll get a little bit better treatment. Yeah, it's pretty much a very bad situation to be in. Once you're in it, like I say, even in the best case, you can still be in jail for a couple of years. The interrogations are horrible, so there's no use not cooperating. But there again, if you didn't do it and they're cooperating, if you didn't do it and they're interrogating you, all you can do is provide as much information as possible. Being uncooperative is just going to really make things sort of worse, because like I say, most of the time they'll convict you regardless. So certainly they had that, and that's what TK Sam wanted me to mention. This is why, you know, I hate to say this, but sometimes you get these situations and you hear these stories about gaijins intervening. They'll see two people fighting in Roppongi and they'll go in to break it up, or they'll see something on a train and they'll come in and, you know, they might see a chikam, for example. I know stories of gaijins, you know, going and beating up chikam, for example. Which on its own I'd say are great things, but you know what, if I was giving advice to people, if the police come and catch you and they don't really understand right away that you are not in the wrong, and if you're a gaijin and you're involved in a fight of any sort of kind or any sort of violent act, generally the presumption is going to be against you unless you can resolve it right there before they detain you. If they detain you, you are screwed. You know, Japanese jails are you don't have the same concern about prison rape and whatnot that you might have in America, but they are harsh. You know, they're basically small cells with really regimented regimes, and yeah, you don't have you basically don't have any rights. Terror sets. So terror sets. What I'm saying is that think twice about. I know people who've done it. I think it's a great thing, and you should help people if you can help them. But at the same time, so the chikan situation, I would say help, for example. But seeing two people fighting, I know cases where people have seen two people fighting in an alley and not knowing anything about it, but deciding to get involved. Do not get involved in that. Do not get involved in a fight in a bar. Certainly nothing that concerns you. And if you see anyone that you know getting into a situation like that, get them the hell out of it as soon as possible, because generally it doesn't. Even if you're okay, it won't end well for you. That's the kind of advice. If you want to know the case that Sam's talking about, it does sound like this person's claiming that he was unwittingly used by this Mexican friend to basically help him to import meth without him knowing, and he is now on the hook for it. Again, drugs are treated as seriously or more seriously than violence in Japan. So again, and the fact that they've detained him now, it seems for a long time, means they've doubled down and they're sort of committing to the path that they're on. So yes, he probably does need some support, and I believe that Sam started a GoFundMe for this person. So you can go and check that if you are over on if you check out his Facebook or his Twitter, you can go find out more information about that. Certainly the other thing to remember is, of course, as well, don't try this stuff in Japan. I remember I've got a friend who used to go out to Narita Airport. She worked at a law firm, and one of her sort of jobs was going out and giving sort of legal advice to foreigners that were detained at the I think they were held at the court at the airport. They take them to the detention center in Ibaraki, which is worse than prison. It's immigration detention, so you don't even have the rights that prisoners there have, and you're just waiting to get deported. She said she told me the story once of someone who came into the country and apparently unknowingly, forgetfully had a single marijuana cigarette with them, a rolled up doobie or whatever, but just basically one on him, and was detained. And apparently he thought it was a huge joke. She basically had like half an hour with him to be able to tell him, okay, you're in a lot of trouble now. I'm not going to be able to talk to you for like another 2 weeks, and you're going to be interrogated. Please cooperate with them. Please just do whatever you got to do. You're going to be kicked out of the country and not allowed back in. But cooperate with them. And apparently she said that the guy was like a sort of a surfer guy, sort of thought the whole thing was hilarious, and, you know, everyone was exaggerating and was kind of laughing it off. And apparently when she came back 2 weeks later, you know, this is remember the standard detention time just for questioning is 20 days. She came back 2 weeks, and she said this guy was completely broken. You know, psychologically traumatized, crying, you know, and pretty horrible stuff. So do not bring drugs into the country. Do not do drugs in the country, or get caught with drugs in the country, or be associated with drugs in this country. Do not get into fights, and be really exercise your judgment about getting into any sort of physical altercation or anything where it could be misinterpreted that you were the bad guy in any sort of situation, including like refusing to pay taxi drivers. Taxi drivers are a big source of again, when gaijins getting into disputes with taxi drivers never works out well for the gaijin. They end up in jail a lot of ways that way. fights in bars often ends up badly. This was a case where fighting in a karaoke, all this sort of stuff, be super careful, and seriously, you don't want to mess with Japan is like, you'll have very few interactions with the police in daily life here. They're not very visible, and it's a very safe society. But it's safe because, frankly, the police here are so scary. Do not mess with them. So that's the message on that. So thank you for that subject, Tikio-san. I hope that got the message across. So what else have we gotten here? YouTube Rewind, 7 million dislikes last that I checked, the most disliked video in history. Hard to say what the point. You know what? I think the fact for me, looking at that video, apart from the fact I haven't really kept up well with all these sort of YouTube trends and who's big anymore. I didn't recognize half the people in the video. People were complaining, it seems like, on two things. One, that BTS or PewDiePie, whatever people that they liked, Logan Paul or who knows, were not on the video. So people were half protesting that people that they wanted to be in the video weren't in the video. The other half is maybe people like me. The fact that the YouTube Rewind video kicked off with Will Smith. I know that Will Smith has started a vlog and like he's just like a hello fellow vloggers. You know, I realize that he's trying to make himself part of the community now. Will Smith is awesome, by the way. Love the guy, respect the guy. But when you start a YouTube community video with like you know, Hollywood celebrities, it's kind of like, well, this isn't really for us anymore, honestly. It's a little bit elitist as well. So for whatever angle that you wanted to come at it, the YouTube video, yeah, and I don't know, it all felt a little bit like the Mickey Mouse Club, a little bit with the way that they did it. Hey, TQ-san, no worries. So from that perspective, I don't know, I just didn't find it that interesting. I honestly didn't really get half of what was in it. So and it seems like neither did half the rest of the internet. All those who did get it, like, didn't like it. So it'll be interesting. I wonder if YouTube will even bother with the Rewind video next year. Or they've got two choices. They should try to rethink the whole thing. They should use their analytics engines and try to actually figure out what would have worked and why didn't this work. If their conclusion is that it's not going to work anymore, that people are just too generally negative about everything, then maybe that's going to be it. But I don't know, who here saw the self-glorification for YouTube, not their partners? Yeah, maybe that's it. Maybe it was kind of a celebration of how, look at how big we've gotten, which maybe, yeah, they have to be careful. And indeed, Mulberry Pie, I agree, it was certainly, yeah, I don't know, it felt like Disneyland kind of trying to manipulate something, right? Like the Mickey Mouse Club sort of a thing. It was stale and kind of lame, which was a shame. But I don't know, I mean, in any case, either they'll do away with it if they think that, you know, obviously this was terrible PR for them, so, you know, they've kind of got to make a decision to try to do it better or to give it up. So we'll see what happens with that. I love maps, and this is kind of a cool map of Tokyo, or the Greater Tokyo region, with basically the different local areas divided up according to the populations of places that they, you know, correspond to. In fact, these are not exactly wards either. Oh, I don't want that. Yep. So that looks like it's Minato-ku, and Shinagawa-ku is like New York City there. You got Los Angeles and the central bit with Chiyoda-ku in the central city. Houston, Las Vegas, Charlotte, that area where Charlotte is less densely populated. In fact, all those areas along the beach on the Chiba side. Miami, Orlando, Atlanta. But certainly in central Tokyo, I don't have much of a sense of how big these US cities are, but just for an idea of how densely populated Tokyo is, that's where everything sort of packs into. So yeah, I don't know, I quite like that. Just out of curiosity, looking at the comments right now, Kang and Kodos, and this is probably me just jumping in at the wrong place in the conversation, Polish background, so the winters or prefect been missing the cold and snow so much. We have a few blocks of land here, so we'll just build. And you're in Australia, right, King and Kodos? So Polish background, I guess you would miss the cold. We have cold in Tokyo. It's sunny and cold, so it's not snowy. But there we go. And Mulberry Pie pointing out that yes, YouTube says watch this space, so who knows? Maybe they'll do a screw you guys follow-up video to it. Who knows? Gang Kodos are needed in Japan. Houses very often, more often than not insulated, which also sucks and adds to the thing. You're supposed to use these gas heaters in rooms and so on, and humidifiers, which gets pretty rough. Coming back on the salary thing earlier, this was kind of interesting. This drama about the JIC, so this is the Japan Investment Fund. So this is basically with the population getting older and the number of people working, the number of young people going down, it means that the government's collecting less and less tax. This is why the sales tax is going up to 10% next year. So the government's trying to do a lot of things to try to increase revenue, including they set up the Special Investment Council to take government funds and figure out smart ways to make money out of their money. And it was staffed by the former heads of banks, top investment banks and whatever, who they persuaded to give up their jobs at these leading financial institutions to come and head up this NPO for the government to look at smart ways to strategically invest government funds to sort of get better value out of it for the taxpayer. The story is, let me see if I can do this. Okay, I can't. The story basically is that they were going to promise a salary of $700,000 to the head of the basically 90 million yen. To the head of the JIC, who was a former Mitsubishi UFG Financial Group executive, who probably it was a pay cut for him coming in, and it would have been a higher salary than any other civil servant on a civil service salary, but it was a pay cut for him. But when it got out that they were basically paying all of these people these salaries that they needed to pay them to attract them, apparently there was outrage throughout the government that he was getting, that these people were all getting paid way more than anyone else in the civil service. And so the government recanted and basically told everybody that no, we're only going to give you $200,000, not $700,000 as promised. And based on that, the head of the organization sort of said, well, you know, that you've broken your promise, then I'm going to resign. In fact, it started out that he didn't say he was going to resign, but he said that they would refuse to carry out their duties if the promise about their salaries wasn't fulfilled. The government refused and wanted to pressure the CEO to quit, seeing him as a rabble-rouser, rounding up the other execs to protest. He did resign over the weekend, along with the 8 other execs that they also hired. The whole entity basically collapsed. Everybody walked out on it. The government's left there looking kind of embarrassed, saying, well, we didn't expect that to happen. But this is it. This is they set up this fund to try to figure out smart ways to invest money in Japan for the Japanese government. They got expert investors. They paid them a slightly below market rate salary, but people were so upset with the salaries that they were being given that they were basically pressured into resigning, and then the whole thing fell apart. When you hear about the sensitivity about like gold salary and whatnot, this is sort of what we're talking about. So that all just fell apart. For me, this is interesting. It's another illustration of just the kind of socialist mindset about the idea of it's not fair that they're getting X salary, and how that's equated with with morality in Japan almost. Those are all the topics I have this week. I've got 15 minutes spare if you guys want to give me anything else to talk about. If not, I might make some tunes, or I might just call it a show early. So let me know what you'd like. Happy to go into whatever. As you can hear, I've still got a bit of a cold at the moment. I could turn on the Korg and try making something. I haven't made a tune for a while, so that might be the best way to go out, actually. Sing a song. That would be the worst of all stories there. TKSM wants more crime stories. Well, I told you all my best ones. I've heard some good ones. I don't really have. If you want to talk about political news, I want you to talk about political news. If you don't want crime stories. Well, by the way, one thing with the YouTube Premium that I have been using this week is that you you know what? I might choose to make music, because honestly, this isn't doing me much good at the moment. Check out Tokyo on Fire. It's a podcast and a show. It's the best political discussion. And now that I've got YouTube Premium and I can download these things and watch them on the train, like the longer episodes, they're really, really good. I can't recommend it enough. I recommended it last week. You know what? So I'm going to make a tune, because the throat's kind of kicking out. So guys, give me a genre. Hip hop, techno, house, or drum and bass, or happy hardcore. And whoa, that's still playing. Let's stop that and get out of there. So tell me what you'd like me to play, and let's see what I can come up with on the fly. Limbs found in the river found in Kitakyushu. Well, Kitakyushu, I don't know anything about that story, but Kitakyushu is basically the Sicily of Japan. I always think of the theme of Godfather whenever I hear stories that basically, you know, Japan, Kitakyushu is the only part of Japan where you hear news stories that start out, there was a grenade attack today, or there was a machine gunning. So Kitakyushu is kind of funny there. Some lo-fi hip-hop says Tai Nakamura. Some bump and beat says Odie Jr. Samurai, Anime Samurai says R&B. We've got everybody in here. We've got two lo-fi hip-hop. I like chip tunes. They're really hard to do with the call, but I'll tell you what, lo-fi hip-hop, I've got 2 votes for that, so I think I'm going to do that. Who are some old gaijin bloggers that I used to read? I don't really read many anymore. I used to read, of course, Japan Probe and those guys, but I used to read Daddy Chew, but he doesn't really play. All of them have gone, so I don't know anyone that still is that active, but yeah. Anyway, let me blow my nose and then switch over into music mode and make a track. Oh, apologies for that. Right, so now let me connect this up, take that out, connect this up. Now you know what? I think there is a problem that because I took out the Korg input, it stayed frozen on that, the HDMI. Let me just see if I can rectify this. It seems I can't rectify it midstream. Well, the sound will still work anyway, so let's just check this. Oh. Okay, right, let's do some lo-fi hip-hop. That's weird. Let's get I'm at 92. Quantize 8. Let's let's get a minimal beat. Live drums. Let's try these. 86. Okay, let's do this. Let's pick a key. Let's make it chroma. Let's get some hi-hat. Okay, let's it's a bit chip-tuny. cool. Don't like the scale so much. Boom. Boom. That's not bad. Don't like this guy so much. Hey, Phoenix to John, good to see you. I'm mixing up some tunes right now. Okay, that's the show. Thank you for joining. Have a good week. Remember, you can check out the rest of this later on. Same time every week, 10:30 p.m. This is I'm Nico Simon from Tokyo Digital Crew. This is Tokyo Tonight. See you next time. 10:30 next Sunday night, Japan time. Kakita no. Keep cool till after school. Peace. See ya. Boom.